Good morning. Welcome to this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show. My name is Leon Jones. This morning's topic, I'm going to talk about psychological disorders in the African American community. Psychological disorders in the African American community. Now, it's very important to understand that in our community, a number of these disorders that you see are generational. They've been passed down from generation to generation. The problem is we as African Americans either don't have the resources to go seek help or we don't want to seek help. Many of us take issues and we sweep them under the rug. But the problem when you do that, what happens is your past begins to dictate your future. So you don't know how a plant is going to grow unless you take care of it. And it depends on how you take care of it. Now, unfortunately, many of us in the African American community have a bunch of issues. Yes, there's white supremacy out there. But unfortunately, we don't have the power or the resources to fight it, so we have to learn how to adjust to it and understand that it's always going to be there. But we can't continue to use that as a paralysis of what's going on in our community. And I don't care if you live in the suburbs, you live in a hood, when you're black, you're black. These issues affect you no matter where you go. Now, the bottom line with the African American community is we are ones who are very emotional. Many of us don't deal with truth well. We hate to be criticized. And I'm not talking about criticized in a way that it denigrates us. I'm talking about being criticized in a way that it can help us. Many of us don't have the skill to deal with conflict resolution. This is why we have a lot of violence going on in our community. But what we have to begin to do as African American people, we have to help the next generations of people. Unfortunately, the generation that I came up in, Generation X, and I was the eldest, and I am the eldest Generation X member, 53 years old, because Generation X began from 1965 and it ended at around 1980 or 1981. My generation experienced a lot of divorce. Now, some of us were brought into this world from early baby boomers and late silent generation. The silent generation is the World War II generation. But what's not been taught to African American people is psychology, behaviors, mental state. And one of the biggest disorders that has gone on in the African American community that I see is molestation. And unfortunately, there have been a number of African American women who have been tainted by African American men, particularly role models or leaders or would-be leaders of the family unit. And when I look at some of these African American women, they have been wearing these scars all their lives. And I'm sorry to hear that. Now, I didn't go through any molestation. I haven't molested anybody. But I know people who have been molested. I know people who have been physically abused. We in the African American community, what we need to understand is we have mental disorders. You know, I can talk to people all day, have a rational conversation, but you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And some of the disorders that I recognize in the African American community start with narcissism, bipolarism, schizophrenia, Stockholm syndrome. And see, here on Black YouTube, we always talk about the problem, but the problem that we talk about is a social problem. But we don't get into health, proper exercise, proper sleeping, stress. We don't get into the foods we eat. And see, my niche here on YouTube is to get into the disorders. This is why you don't catch me beefing with other brothers out there, because they have their niche. But one thing I can tell you about the African American community, it's still a strong community. Now, why do I say that? Because no matter what we've gone through, we find a way to live. But we're doing it wrong, a number of us. And of course, we've had institutions like the church and education. They failed us. But that's not the big problem. The big problem is the psychological disorders. And when you have disorders, they cause the breakdown of the family. They cause the breakdown of how we interact with one another, how we speak to one another. We in the African American community tend to put other races on a pedestal, but we hate our own. That comes from slavery. That's been brainwashed into us. The problem is, African Americans in the past weren't allowed to have education, so they didn't know about these issues. But as we have gotten into the education system, many of these issues still haven't been resolved in the African American community. And I'm talking about the issues of mental disorders. Many of us believe that mental disorders are white people's problems. But one thing I will tell you about white people, when they need help, they'll go seek help. But I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about our race. Because living in some of these shambalistic neighborhoods, because there are a lack of resources, and the resources not only come from money, but they come from lack of counseling, lack of jobs, lack of education, and the big one, lack of family structure, comes from the generation of slavery. Now remember, you hear a number of us who talk about fathers leaving. Back in slavery, families were broken up. Families were created and then disbanded because black people were used as property. In fact, Cambridge, Maryland, which is around Salisbury, Maryland, you had family members having incest with each other. Why? So they could produce babies to be sold to Southern slave owners for profit. A lot of people don't know that because they don't read. But as African American people, when it comes to mental disorders, we have them. Trust me, I've had my own anger issues and I got help. But when I look at YouTube and look at the types of conversations that go on in these hangouts, I see a lot of people who are very passionate about what they believe in, but they got emotional disorders. And many of them basically stem from the environment that you were raised. Now, many of us were raised in single mother households. I'm not saying that some of these single mothers pick bad men. I'm not saying they pick good men. But when you're brought up in a household where there's dysfunction and no structure, when you get out to the real world, you're going to carry that emotional baggage wherever you go. Now, in past videos, you've heard me talk about the incubus and the succubus. Those are demons. Now, spiritually, many African Americans are filled with those demons. This is why we hate each other. Some of us use that Bible as a caveat or an escape route to avoid the responsibility of understanding that we have mental disorders and we sin. But at the end of the day, we as African Americans must learn how to accept the truth. And the truth is we are at the bottom of the economic ladder. We don't know anything about politics. Many of us vote. We don't know what we're voting for. We always vote for what we're against. A number of us are very emotional. Many of our women decided to go with white feminism only to be a number instead of a person. And many of our black men sold drugs. Now, I know they had to survive. They couldn't get jobs. But with African American men, 40% of the inmate population is filled with African American men. And not all of these men were bad. But when you put everything together, many of us don't understand the mental issues, the scars. And when you live in deception by thinking something isn't happening, but it really is happening, you do yourself and the people around you harm. Why? Because the behaviors that some of us have are very destructive. Now, what I'm doing in this video, I'm giving you information right from my head here. I'm not reading anything. A lot of articles that I present, I read, and I discuss them. But I'm going by my observation of what I know. Because I live here in Portage, Indiana. And right next to me, there's Gary, Indiana, East Chicago, and Hammond. And then if I go further east, there's Benton Harbor, Michigan, South Bend, Indiana. And then I go a little further south, there's Lafayette, Indiana. Areas that are filled with African American people tend to be dysfunctional. And I still see a number of us living in public housing. I call public housing the concentration camp. And living in the concentration camp and some of these other ghettos, you find a high concentration of single mothers, lack of education, high violence, drug and alcohol use, domestic violence, and the biggest one, a lack of family structure. Certainly you have a lot of churches, and then one big item that's in the hood is a liquor store. Now, those liquor stores were put there so black people can drink themselves to death. It's population control. Because many African Americans get liver disease from drinking. And in the hood also you find Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood was put there so African Americans can utilize that facility for abortions. What Margaret Sanger wanted to do was basically control the African American population. She didn't like African Americans. But see, it's not surprising that a lot of people don't like African Americans. And the reason why they don't like African Americans is because they never understand African Americans. They get their information from the individuals who are controlling the media. This is why we're all put into the same pot. But African Americans, many of us have a lot of envy. We have a lot of jealousy. We have a crabs in a barrel mindset. Many of us vote Democrat. We vote on emotion. Now, there's some of us here on YouTube who actually do the work, and they do good work. But what I'm seeing in the African American community is many of us aren't addressing our mental issues and our health issues. You ever wonder why in some of these bigger cities you get all the greasy restaurants in the black neighborhoods? I mean, they actually got some slop in there called grease. Some of your greasy hamburger joints, greasy Chinese joints, fried chicken. Well, they're put there. Now, this is a conspiracy theory, but they're put there so we can become overweight. And once we become overweight, we get high blood pressure and we die of heart disease. Because in those fried foods, they're very fatty. And when the fat continues to get in our system, it clogs up our arteries. And then once it gets to the heart, we have a heart attack. You don't see any Planet Fitness in the hood. You don't. I can ride up and down Broadway all day. Don't see one. But what I see is a bunch of liquor stores, a bunch of churches, Little Caesars Pizza, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Church's Chicken, Popeye's Chicken, to name a few. But what we aren't doing as African American people is addressing our issues that are psychological and health-wise. See, we can address all the social issues. We know they're taking place. And with the social issues, you're not going to solve them until you solve the psychological issues. Many of us as African Americans can't even have a conversation. We don't want to admit when we're wrong. Many of us are fractured. And we're going to always be fractured until we open up and discuss our issues. Now, earlier this week, I went to a leadership seminar because I work for the Indiana Department of Transportation. And I actually sat down with my district deputy commissioner of the LaPorte District of NDOT. And I discussed what I saw within that organization. And I told him flat out, there are no African Americans in upper management positions. And he simply told me, well, we're working with women. And I said, well, women have enough rights. In fact, our black women made the mistake by hopping on white feminism. And when that happened, that took the affirmative action away from black people and it gave it to white women. And now many of us are suffering because those jobs were for us. You see, when we think emotionally, we become gullible. And that's what a number of African American women did. And at the end of the day, if you look at our neighborhoods, and they've been run by women, they're in flux right now. They're discombobulated. Because they don't even understand themselves that they made poor choices in men, and the men don't understand they made poor choices in women. Now, the choices of the men and women, were these men and women bad? I don't necessarily believe that they were bad. I believe that many of us oversee the mental status of the person that we're picking. African Americans are very, very materialistic. They are. We're consumers. The problem with us is we don't understand investing. And let me tell you something. Lack of resources and economics can also put stress on a person. Now, I'll tell you, this video may sound like it's all over the place, but I'm just giving you examples of the mental disorders like narcissism, lack of health and exercise, lack of checkups, lack of trips to the dentist. We don't understand our blood pressure readings, A1Cs. We don't understand disorders like schizophrenia, histrionic personality disorders. We don't understand those disorders, but a lot of us have them. We have anger issues. Now, regardless of what else is going on around us, we have to get ourselves in check with our mental status. And I know it's very difficult for African American men and African American women to have a conversation, because we've been taught how to hate each other. The only thing we know how to do is fight with one another. We compete for power. We compete for crumbs that the government provides us. But if you look at our race, we're still at the bottom. Very few of us are millionaires. In fact, most of the people who are millionaires in the African American community are in the entertainment sector. You don't have a lot of high profile business moguls. But everybody can't be a rapper. Everybody can't play ball. Everybody can't be a preacher. Everybody can't be a singer. You have to have some people to do the dirty work. And the reason why some of these cities that are run by African American people, particularly Democrats, have a hard time is because most of the people in the city council don't know how to negotiate for money. I mean, all around me, I live here in Portage. They're doing fantastic because you have people who know how to get money from the federal government and LPA projects, or for LPA projects, which stands for local project agencies, which are city projects or municipal projects to be built up to attract people. And the more people you attract to your community, the more taxpayers you get, the more revenue that your city gets, and your goods and services become more improved. But if you go over to an area like Gary, Indiana, it's still in shambles. It looks like a war zone. Yes, they are tearing down some of the old abandoned buildings, but still, the city looks like it's in ruins. But even if the city were built in a decent fashion, I don't want to say built in a decent fashion. I want to say it's in decent fashion. That's correct. Much better grammatically. Looking at the appeal of Gary, Indiana, if it's in fine fashion, it still would be in shambles. Why? Because it's the mindset of the people. Many of us don't want to address our mental disorders. We tend to blame. We tend to shame. We can't wave any magic wand to bring back slavery and correct it. But what we can do is pass down knowledge from generation to generation. Now, the problem, too, that we don't have is we don't have any money to pass down like white folks. And many of us aren't passing down knowledge either. We want to keep that knowledge to ourselves. And at the end of the day, that's not helping us. That's destroying us. But as African Americans, before we do anything, we have to correct our mental disorders, and we have a lot of them. And we have to be men and women enough to address them. We can go get counseling. Many of us don't want to get counseling. In fact, we'll go to other people on social media to air out our emotions. And this is why I don't involve myself with a number of individuals, some of these chats on YouTube, because they have mental disorders. Not saying they're bad people, but we have to be able to control ourselves. You see, the ultimate goal that you want to reach is a win-win situation. Many of us don't know how to understand that because we haven't been taught. Many of us, again, sweep the issues under the rug. It's not that we don't care, because we do. We just don't know how to deal with the issues. As African American people, it's okay to be spiritual because that's part of it. But what's happening, we're losing a lot of ground because of our mental issues. And I've always said, emotion clouds critical thinking. And when I see some of these black politicians running for office, they're not helping. They have the Democratic plantation mindset. And you have some individuals who are in powerful positions as African Americans, they don't want African Americans to think for themselves. They too have mental disorders because they are self-destructive. Their policies are going to continue to destroy African American cities. I'm not saying they're bad people, but you have to look at the actions of some of us. You have to look at how we react when truth is being told. Nobody wants to hear the truth. It does hurt, but it should shock you back into reality. Many of us have been living a lie for years. We've been told we look good when we really don't look good. And the only way you will find out about any of these disorders, time will tell. And I've always said, your past dictates your future. Now, I didn't cover everything I wanted to in this video, but in upcoming videos, I'm going to break down some of these mental disorders that I see in the African American people. But for now, take time to listen to this video. If you like it, give me a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give me a thumbs down. Let me know what you think about some of these disorders we have. And I want intelligent comments. And if you are a subscriber of mine, continue to support the channel. This information that I'm delivering is free information. If you're a new subscriber, welcome to the 401 Talk Zone radio show and bring me 10 subscribers. Because we need channels here on YouTube that also talk about mental disorders. I know in the African American community, we basically talk about the social or the controversial topics. But it's important that we talk about mental health, psychology, economics, and politics as well. Because in order to build a full-fledged functioning community, you must understand the 5 power conferences of society. And they are private companies, government, education, religion, and education. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show for this morning, Saturday, October 20th, 2018. You can tune in to the 411 Talk Zone radio show every Wednesday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. I haven't been doing Blog Talk Radio lately, but you can go back and listen to my archived Blog Talk Radio shows. But I will be doing Blog Talk Radio, and I'm going to have a new format. It's just going to be a podcast format. If you want to call in, you can call in, but for the most part, I'm just going to be talking about the issues in podcast form. Also, if you like my videos, please share and subscribe to the 401 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. And going back, the call-in number to my Blog Talk radio show is 215-383-5785. And right here on the 411 Talk Zone Radio Show, I want to continue to bring you quality information for educational purposes from a professional and mature perspective. On this channel, I don't do anything controversial. I don't have debates or emotional issues, although some of the topics may be sensitive to some people. It's just to shock them back into reality. This is why I don't have any drama or unnecessary bickering, because it's counterproductive. What you get here is education, self-awareness, and you also get positivity from a realistic perspective. And I always say, if you don't have knowledge, you don't have power. And if you have a topic, a new YouTube channel, or business that you would like for me to discuss on YouTube or Blog Talk Radio, simply email me at lej6521@gmail.com. And if you have a comment, please list your comment in the comment section under the video. But make sure that your comments are pithy. No bloviating, pettifogging, or filibustering. And that's it for this video. Oh, one more thing. If you can't find my videos on YouTube, go to my Facebook page. I also have a Twitter page. You can follow me there for all my Blog Talk Radio shows there. And again, I want to reemphasize, when you leave a comment, make sure it's pithy, no bloviating, pettifogging, or filibustering. What I mean by that is, stick to the topic, if you wish to opine. Now that's it for this video. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. Remember, please be gentle and respectful to each other, and have a wonderful and blessed day. God bless you all.